first vindication came about from something known as the Powers Report.
Mm-hmm.
And when Enron was totally falling apart, our asleep at the switch board of directors finally hired an outside law firm, an outside accounting firm to investigate my concerns and to look into a few other things. And they added Bill Powers to the board, and he was running this investigation. And Bill Powers was the dean of the School of Law at University of Texas at Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And so this report has his name on it. It's known as the Powers Report. And they filed it early February 2002. And that really vindicated me. It basically said everything I had claimed was true, and there's even some more rotten stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that felt safer. I was no longer the one lone voice that was saying Enron had committed fraud.
Yeah, I mean, how different would your life have been if that staffer didn't go into that archive box? I mean, have you thought about that before?
Well, yeah, it'd be very different, because I think I would have worked at Enron maybe a month or two more, and then I would have been part of that 5,000 trying to find, a job.
Yeah. So you definitely took the scenic route. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, walking into Congress, what was that like? I mean, it's kind of this interesting dynamic that you were kind of a part of, because it's almost like the allegiance can differ between your country and your government. And, what I find is that whistleblowers, to your point, are some of the most loyal people. They're some of the most conscientious people. They're the most value-driven people. And they're really being super loyal to this idea of what the company is, or the idea of what the company is supposed to be, as stated on its values page or on its mission or something. Mm-hmm. And yet there's this sort of paradox where management is maybe pushing in a different direction due to their own self-interest or something, where there's this sort of like, and I think this is why a lot of whistleblowers get blackballed, which I'd love to talk about a little bit. Mm-hmm. But there's this interesting sort of dissonance between like the source of the loyalty, and sometimes you think you're working you're trying to be loyal to the company when actually someone is sort of taking advantage of you. And I think we saw an example of that as you were kind of brought in to help kind of build the defense. When it became clear to you that, okay, hey, there's kind of nothing to save, there's no way to save this sinking Titanic, and then you're brought into Congress, what was that like walking in there? And as you look down the path where you're like, okay, I'm kind of in the grease now. These guys pushed me in the grease. What were those feelings like when you're like, how do I get up out of this thing and kind of land back on my feet?
Well, it's interesting because Congress did subpoena Ken Lay, our risk management person, Richard By, Rick Causey, our chief accounting officer, Andy Fastow, and they all pled the fifth. They went there, they held up their hand to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But when asked questions, they said, I'm pleading the Fifth Amendment.
Yeah.
Jeff Skilling did testify. He was the only, one of the only few executives, but a few others did too. The lawyers testified, Jeff McMahon testified. And what I found in watching and paying attention to their congressional testimony is they sure had trouble recalling a lot of things.
Uh-huh.
I just don't recall that, or yes, I know I wrote that down, but that was 4 years ago or 2 years ago. And for me, when I was called to testify, you're sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And so I kind of felt like I sure don't want to lie.
Yeah.
If there's truth that I know, I'm supposed to tell the whole truth. So it was a lot of testimony really pointing out where the problems were. It kind of helped mark the prosecutional trail on where Enron had problems. And at that point, Enron was already bankrupt. You're really wanting the truth to come out. So the guilty people might be held to account, but there might be some lessons learned from it.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I want to kind of dive into the label, and, very few whistleblowers that we've spoken to would say, I wouldn't do it again, because they're just those kinds of people. Mm-hmm. But how difficult was your life after you stood on your principles, and how long did it take for whatever negative label or whatever that was attached to you for oddly, paradoxically doing the right thing to kind of fall off? You know what I mean?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm the only whistleblower that has a great story. You know, all that congressional testimony, Time put us on their cover. I, I, I had immediate speaking requests, all over the country. And, I've been to some fantastic places around the globe talking about leadership and ethics. So I have a very good story, able to make a living on the lecture circuit. But as I sought out corporate employment, those doors would be shut. And even I used to live 2 blocks from Rice University and looked at participating in some of their executive sessions and their executive training. And it looked like it was a big, wide open door of opportunity until that door was slammed shut. So I think it's taken almost 20 years for the full troublemaker aspect of it to wash off. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm now the executive and residence at Texas State University. First full-time job in 20 years.
Wow.
So that's a long time, for that label to be washed off.